Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in business leaders with skin in the game who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability. With expert guests across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of insight, delving into their methods, their thinking, and approach to problem solving. This is the longer form podcast format where we have the time to delve a little deeper into the guest's experience, stories, and priceless nuggets of lessons learned. I'm your host, Al McBride. My guest today is Mr. Alastair McDermott. Now, I've known Alastair since way back in 2007 or so. We actually even had a business together at one point, a business project for nearly 2 years, I think, at the time. And even to this day, look, he's very much who I'd call whenever I want a different perspective or a new or valuable insight, or even just to check that my thinking's going in the right direction. So he's hugely valuable to me. He's also did a fabulous job, as it happens, on the recent upgrade of almcbride.com. So if you're ever at my website, everything that looks good there is due to him. He is known as the website doctor and more recently focused in on what he's been doing for years, which is marketing for consultants. So in that vein, Alastair helps independent consultants to generate more leads consistently so they can eliminate the dependence on referrals and get out of the feast-famine cycle. He does this by helping them create and execute a simple yet effective marketing strategy that works for their business and client base. He's a former software engineer, now marketing consultant. He built his first website on GeoCities in the before time of 1996. That was way back then. And he has been hooked on websites ever since. He left a safe corporate job in early 2007 to start and grow his first business during the worst recession in modern history. And that was a pretty wild ride. Along the way, he co-founded several startups, one of which was with me, I'm proud to say, some of which were mildly successful. And he has written a book called Running a Website with WordPress, a quick guide for business owners. Ooh, we knackered after that one, Alastair. Known to me as Other Alastair, welcome to the show. Welcome. Great to have you on here.
Thanks, Al.
Good to have you. A few people, of course, the more eagle-eyed will have spotted you on the short interview format. And there's some good feedback there. And I know there's a ton of things we can talk about, as we always do. I thought I'd get a few of those gems to the audience. So I thought I'd have you back on the show. So thanks for coming on.
Cool. So, great to be here. Yeah.
There's so many things we can talk about, but I know you have many interesting opinions on things, and I'd love to delve into them. Let's just start with your thoughts around risk, because we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I thought you had a lovely perspective that a lot of people might get some value out of.
Yeah, I guess I think what we were talking about is the risk of taking some action. And quite often we'll see, in particular in business and just in general, that people are afraid of the risk of taking some action when they're not considering the risk of inaction. And that sometimes it can be more risky not to do something than to do something, whether that be the right thing or the wrong thing. And I think that when you're considering the risk of something like, for example, starting a business or staying in a job, I think that particularly nowadays, jobs aren't as safe as they used to be, and so in from one perspective, it might be safer to start your own business. So depending on what you do, so I think that in almost every circumstance, you need to weigh the risk of inaction and look at how that might be coming into play.
It's a very good point, because, I think you and I, we've always, for years now, we've run our own show, our own projects in various domains. So we're kind of used to it. But as I said, it's one of these things where people, I think they have a false sense of certainty and a false sense of security with inaction, because they think, if I stay where I am, that's safe. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, and sometimes even just staying when you are and having nothing happen, that's opportunity cost, and that's kind of a risk in itself,
Very true, yeah, you're missing out. Yeah, I mean, the bad thing is FOMO, but the other side, as you say, is opportunity cost. Absolutely, absolutely. You once wonderfully said, your website is not for you, it's for your clients. And I love that because, an awful lot of my perspective is all about, it's not about you, it's about your audience, or for negotiation stuff, it's not about you. Put your perspective on your counterpart, move that focus.
Yeah.
So how does that work out in website terms? What would someone do differently when they focus more on their clients?
Well, so I'm talking to business owners, and I've talked to thousands of business owners over the last decade and a half about websites, and one thing I hear coming over and over again is some form of assumption. People don't want that, or people don't do that on websites. People don't read, people don't look at pictures, people don't look at videos, people don't scroll down, and lots of assumptions about what visitors will and won't do on websites. And a lot of business owners, or even people in marketing, they're not really looking at the fact that the website is not really for you. The end user is the customer or the visitor who wants to use your service, and you need to make the website fit their needs and make it for them. And sometimes that's including videos and having long pages that people will scroll down, and having information that maybe you personally wouldn't look at or wouldn't read.
Right. It's an interesting one. I remember my uncle worked on one of the big bank website redesigns about 15 years ago. And there was huge pushback because he wanted to design it how a customer uses it, whereas they had it designed literally by the departments. It's like, oh, but these two things don't go together. It's like, yeah, but when you're a customer, you want those three options in a row, It's that kind of thinking.
My background is in software engineering, and it is a very kind of software engineering, software developer viewpoint. When you're building these systems, you try and replicate the internal structure of an organization, and you need somebody to advocate for the end user to say, look, from a user perspective, here's what they're trying to do. Here's how we should mold what we're doing to fit that, rather than trying to force the user into the boxes that we want.
That brings up another topic, which is, that eternal dilemma, particularly with consultants or even with creative people when you're working with them or doing client work, I should say. How you give them what they're asking for and what they want versus what they need.
Yeah.
How do you balance those two?
Well, I think you have to slip the pills into the ice creamer. It's like you have to give them what they need as well as what they want. And ultimately it's driven, if somebody doesn't want something, it doesn't matter how much they need it. So you have to try, and it's a balancing act. You have to try and maybe coming back to your thing, it's negotiation as well. So, but selling people on the concepts and the ideas and showing them why it's important.
That's what it's all about. Yeah, winning them over with a better way to get to where they're trying to go to, I suppose. Tell me, you have a lot of interesting perspectives, as I said, and it's always a pleasure and usually hugely insightful to talk to you about all sorts of different things. But particularly in your industry, what do you believe that a lot of people don't?
I think a few different things.
There's quite a few, but try and pick one or two.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, one thing, and I know that this will resonate with some people and won't with others, but I think that referrals and reliance on referrals is dangerous. And now I'm saying that from the context that in the professional services space, probably 95% of business is through referrals and word of mouth. But I think relying on that and that alone is very, very dangerous because it's very hard to generate referrals on a regular basis. And secondly, it's very hard to raise your prices when you are based on referrals, because referrals tend to come from people who are similar to the people who are referring you. And you can get into this feast and famine cycle where you're just on this kind of roller coaster. You're working on a project, you haven't really, you're working on the project, you haven't really put out or built a pipeline, and you get to the end of the project and you don't have any work coming. So,
as you say, it's the pipeline problem, isn't it? Where what you want to be doing is doing the work. So when you have it, you want to be doing it to the best of your ability and for the betterment of the client and all that good stuff. But as you say, then you're dropping the ball on filling the pipeline for when it's done.
Yeah.
So
I think that people like my clients and your clients, I expect, or I suspect, I think that they are probably not spending enough time on marketing,
right?
Which is another issue.
It's because most people don't like marketing, or
yeah, and I think that what a lot of people think of as marketing is not really, like, they're thinking of kind of either, you know, horrible sales pressure tactics like you might see on TV, or cold calling, or things like that, you know, or just advertising.
right.
Whereas I think that marketing can be done a lot of different ways, but the ways that are appropriate for professional services are again, they're very different.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, as you said, you know, referrals are great. Of course they are. It's a warm introduction. I mean, we all know that. But as you said, it's getting the regularity of them, having a dependable list. I mean, I know you're not just saying this. I mean, I know you did a ton of research on LinkedIn, and you had several thousand responses to various different surveys to find out exactly what the reality is. So I know you're not just saying that, but referrals, because a lot of people, you know, referrals are sacred and it's part of a good relationship building and all this sort of stuff. So can I imagine there's a lot of emotional pushback. So what's your solution to go with or to even replace referrals?
Okay, well, yeah, so I did a survey through LinkedIn mostly, and I've had over 1,000 responses now to I guess a handful of different survey questionnaires that I put out, and it's just given me a lot of insight into different aspects of marketing, particularly for consultants and professional service providers and kind of knowledge-based and experts, those types of businesses. And so what I found was that there seems to be three big buckets in terms of generation of business. One is the referral and networking bucket. The second is the cold calling or outbound, sometimes cold emails or sometimes LinkedIn messages. And then the third is inbound. And inbound is probably the least used, but it's the one that people are really interested in right now. And a lot of people think that it doesn't work for our types of business, that it, you know, for example, I'll hear people say SEO doesn't work for consultants and things like that. So, but actually it can do if you do it the right way. And so those are the three kind of options. And I think that most people's business development activities will fit into one of those three. And usually it's the referrals and networking based. And so what I'm trying to do is help people to do the third, which is inbound.
Yeah, and just before we get further into inbound, you know, one of the things that surprised me when we were having a chat about the data from your LinkedIn studies on consultants and professional service providers was where the blame went for when people were essentially going out of business or business was drying up. I remember, you know, some people were saying, "Oh, it's my age." One guy literally was, "I'm too young," and he had one guy at the other end of the spectrum saying, "Oh, I'm too old. That seems to be why I'm not getting any more work." They couldn't quite see that it's because they'd saturated their network and they'd reached the limit of it. Yeah,
and I think like referrals can work if you have a good network already, and if you're an extroverted networking type of person, it can work really well for you. And if you have a particularly long sales cycle and long sales projects, so for example, I was talking to somebody and their average project length was 5 years. Wow. So they only need to find a new client every 5 years.
Right, so they only need to start looking in the last year or two. You know? So
they only needed a network of 20 or 30 ideal clients, and they're set for life. They will never, but the shorter your sales cycle and the shorter your projects, the more of a network you're going to need.
Absolutely. So inbound for a lot of people is kind of a hot topic at the minute. I mean, I'm heavily involved in it, as you know, through Tom Poland and the whole Leadsology thing, and that's
doing
brilliant.
This here.
And it's a parallel here, exactly. But a lot of people are like, okay, so I'm willing to give inbound a look. I'm willing to give it some time and resources.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that third way then? How do people start to go about it? What's involved?
Okay, so inbound marketing, from my perspective, is content marketing. And another way of talking about content marketing is to call it education marketing or authority marketing.
Right.
And it's all for me, it's all the same thing. It's about creating educational content that will educate your ideal client and sometimes entertain them as well. Particularly if you've got a good sense of humor and you can do that, you can mix it in. But usually it's about educational type content, stuff that is really useful. It's insightful. It's helpful to them in solving the problem that they have, and it's about creating that content in and putting it out there on a regular basis, and developing your authority because you're seen as putting out good content on a particular topic that is insightful, that is informative, and when you build up a body of work like that. That can help to replace the trust, because this is the really crucial thing in professional services. The reason why networking is so important and referrals and word of mouth is so important is because it passes trust.
Of course, yes.
What we're selling usually in professional services is an invisible, intangible service. And quite often it's very expensive and very risky. And so you need a huge amount of trust. It's not transactional. It's not like buying a bar of chocolate or a pair of Nikes. It's something that's not very well understood. Quite often the client and the provider will start a project without even knowing what the scope of the project is. So in order to, and also the client knows that they're going to be entering into a relationship with this provider as well. And all of those things come together to make it so that trust is really crucial. And that's why the personal referral is so important. And that's why the content creation and authority and doing things like writing books or doing a podcast, that's why that's so effective, because it's replacing that. It can substitute for that trust because they can see your body of work. They can see what you're putting out there. They can listen to your voice on a podcast, see you on videos. And so it replicates that.
So I'm loving that. And it's a lovely point that it's that same trust that you're building up usually slowly through all this content that you're creating. As you said, authority marketing or content marketing. As you said, it comes under lots of names. How does someone start going about becoming that authority in that little niche?
Well,
in your little area.
I think it really starts with writing. Now I'm sure there are other ways to do it. You can, if you really don't like writing, you can do things like dictating, or you can find somebody to interview you.
Right.
But you need to draw the ideas out of your head and put them down on paper and in online. And so you need to get those ideas out of your head. And the other thing is, part of the process of creating the content forces you to develop your logic and to formulate your thoughts. And so the actual process of writing actually makes you better. And so that actually helps to develop your authority and your expertise.
Right, because there is that issue with imposter syndrome where a lot of people go, I know I'm good at what I do, but I don't know if I'm good enough to be like the poster person for my area.
Yeah.
People often also fear, the spotlight somewhat. They want to do the work. They know they're well adequate when they get the gig, but it's putting yourself up there and having a point of view that's a little bit more tricky. What would you say to people who have that issue? Okay,
so first thing is, everybody has imposter syndrome. Everybody gets it. Even the most experienced experts who know their stuff. There are very few people who don't get it. Maybe you'd need to be a psychopath to not have imposter syndrome,
True.
So I think that first of all, you got to acknowledge, look, imposter syndrome is normal. And also there is is it Dunning-Kruger that I'm thinking
I was going to say, it is exactly the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
It's essentially
and so experts are less confident in their own knowledge than people who know less than them.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so look, you've got to acknowledge that and just bear that in mind. The other thing is, and I'm a big fan of specialization, and
Right.
the more that you specialize, the more you go deeper into a niche or a niche. The more that you go deeper onto a topic and do the same types of projects repeatedly, the more you develop your knowledge, and the more of an expert you become in that area. And so that can also give you reassurance, because when you've done 20 similar projects, you can be pretty sure that you know what you're talking about.
And that makes a lot of sense when you say it, and I know we've had this similar conversation around the specialization, horizontal versus vertical specialization. You might explain a bit about the difference, but also a lot around that, a lot of the reluctance is around, well, literally the fear of loss. You're cutting off opportunity in the hope of getting greater opportunity. So, yeah, how do you allay people's fears about that? Well, first of all, horizontal and vertical specialization would be good to get your take on. What are they? What's the difference?
Okay, so just in terms of types of specialization. So first of all, there's a generalist.
Right.
And a generalist is pretty good at lots of things, and maybe even very, very good at lots of things. But I think it's very difficult to be a true expert in everything.
Right. And can you give an example, maybe? So people
well, sure.
As we go through it,
as a web designer.
Right.
I was a generalist.
Right.
And so I would do a website for a financial advisor, and for a charity, for a medical charity, and for a dentist, for a shop, for so for all sorts of different types of businesses. And so that would be very much a kind of a generalist, and also not just providing the website, but also doing other things like search engine optimization or Google AdWords and things like that. So providing multiple services to lots of different types of businesses. Okay. And it's basically being a kind of like a full services agency.
Right.
And that's a very much a generalist kind of model.
Okay.
So then there's three other types of specialization as I see it, which one is a platform or tool specialization. And that's where you say that we specialize in this one thing. So we specialize in Amazon Web Services. If you need something done with Amazon Web Services, we can do that. Or WordPress or Joomla.
I was going to say you went and specialized into WordPress very early, which was a bit unusual.
I did, yeah. And so that in one sense, it was useful because I happened to pick the right horse, and WordPress became very, very popular. So I kind of I started using WordPress exclusively in about 2006 or so, and I didn't build websites in any other system after that. And so that was quite good, because it blew up in popularity and became bigger than every other system put together. So yeah, that was a bit lucky. But there is also a commoditization, and particularly over time, any tool that comes out at the start, you've got the early adopters, and they're going to be specialists in the tool. But over time, what happens is more people get on that same horse, then it becomes more commoditized. So that's one issue with platform. But the other issue is,
just like, what's the benefit of the platform for you? I mean, I'm sure there's a benefit for the clients, but what was the benefit when you said, okay, I'm just going to do WordPress? Did it speed up
systems and processes, really?
Systems and process. Okay.
Yeah, just using the same tools over and over again really helps.
You just get much better and faster at them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you can do things like you can automate and things like that as well,
Okay. So what's the next one then?
Yeah, and okay, so then we have vertical and we have horizontal. Right. And so horizontal, I tend to think of as a problem or as a solution, kind of one and the same. So horizontal specialization is saying, let's say we help businesses with search engine optimization, and that's what we do.
So whether you're a dentist or a
doesn't
farmer
matter who you are,
or a shop,
we will do we will do provide our service, or and horizontal and platforms sometimes kind of overlap. Like you might say, well, we do Google AdWords, for example.
Right.
And they can get a bit wider as well. You could say, well, we do marketing, or we do online marketing, and that's kind of really, really wide horizontal. Right. Then there's vertical, and vertical is the one that really interests me, and that is picking a specific industry or niche. And so for me, I've picked consultants and management consultants in particular, and that is picking one vertical and saying, this is who we specialize in, this is who we work with. And so when you do that, you are turning away everybody else, but you're doubling down for your particular niche. So those who are your ideal clients.
So what's the advantage in doing that? I'm sure there's many, because as I said, a lot of people would be like, yeah, that sounds great, and then they think, oh, but I have to cut all these other people out and say
most people don't say that's great. Most people say, oh my god, that is terrifying.
Oh, okay. So they go straight to terrifying.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually, yeah.
Okay, so
the big advantage.
What are the advantages?
The big advantage in vertical specialization for me is that your clients congregate.
Right.
And so they have a trade journal, or a number of trade journals or magazines or newspapers. They have particular websites that they're on. They have associations that they're in. They have memberships. They have particular conferences that they always go to. They have professional bodies. All of these things that you get when you focus down. And like I was talking to somebody in the States recently, and there's an association of precision machinery parts, and like that's really getting quite niche down, But if you want to sell to companies, to manufacturers who make precision machine parts, there is an association, there is a magazine you can advertise in, there's conferences you can go to, and you can target your clients, and you can just address that market in a way that you never could if it was generalist. And okay. I came to this because I was encountering this problem myself when I was trying to write blog posts on my generalist website. And trying to write blog posts for everybody means you're writing them for nobody. So you need to have somebody specific. So writing content becomes so much easier because you're addressing a particular market.
Right. So we're going back to being much clearer then when you're creating the content to make you the authority or be seen as greater authority. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've also mentioned this idea of the Rolodex test, or what was it called?
Right, yeah, the Rolodex moment. I think that comes from Jonathan Stark. Right. Yeah, so the Rolodex moment is if you tell somebody who you work with, and it's a specialist area, it's a vertical, it's much easier for them to identify if they know somebody.
Right.
So if I say, yeah, I work with independent consultants and small consulting firms, people will know if they know a consultant or they know somebody that sounds like. Whereas if I said, oh yeah, I work with professional service providers, it doesn't really connect. For most people, they won't immediately picture somebody. Gotcha. So whereas they probably do know somebody who's a consultant, or if you get more specific, do you know any management consultants? And you can mentally go through your head and say, yeah, I do.
It's so true, because if you said what a lot of people would say, like, oh, I build websites, or I build high-end websites, which is about what you do, not even who you serve. Mm-hmm. People sort of go, oh, that's nice, but I don't particularly know anyone who needs a website, because a lot of people don't say that when they meet their friends. But as you said, if you go, I do marketing services for management consultants, they go, oh yeah, I know 3 management consultants. Maybe they don't, but they will keep you in mind. I mean, even if they don't, but it certainly makes it easier for them to figure that out. Very true, very true. So tell me more about how to create content then, in that regard of creating that authority, in making those connections to your ideal client base, which is now significantly narrower and focused. For continuing down that line.
Well, it is. It's so much easier if you're writing to one audience, and I can attest this by simply looking at my blog, where for 13, 14 years, I was writing about one blog post every 6 months. And whereas now I can quite easily write one a week. There's no problem with finding ideas and so yeah, it's much easier to create the content. So how to actually create it? The first thing I would suggest is just imagine somebody comes to you. Maybe it's a friend of yours.
Oh.
So imagine that somebody comes to you. Maybe it's a friend of yours, and they're in trouble, and you can help them. And they say to you, "Look, I'm going to be out of business in 30 days unless we put into place the thing that you do." And so what are all the things that you would tell them? And write those down. So what are the things that you would tell them because they're in trouble and you can help? And that can be a good prompt, a good kind of writing prompt or way to start generating the content. If that doesn't help, or once you've exhausted that, look at the questions that you've had from clients in emails and in the conversations that you have, because they will tell you the things that are important. It's really simple. And if you haven't had enough of those conversations, the next thing to do is just start talking to people more. Talk to your ideal clients. Just ask them about the problems that they're encountering. And there's almost no downside to picking up the phone and calling a client or a potential client. And not from the point of view of trying to sell them on something, but just to have a conversation.
I hear that. I mean, I'm a huge advocate, as you know, of those discovery conversations before any negotiation or serious sales sort of conversation. So I'm a huge fan of that, of doing your discovery, of asking open-ended questions and letting people speak. And just to mention on that, we talked about this before, where an awful lot of people are a bit reluctant. It's like, sometimes people are a bit reluctant, but often then they think, okay, you are actually just here to listen and to learn. Yeah. And it's shutting them up is usually the problem.
Yeah, and I think you really have to come from it from a positive place where you're really going to be saying, look, I'm here from the point of view of wanting to do right by you. I'm not going to try and sell you. I'm not going to try and it's the enlightened self-interest of not doing any kind of sales pitch and just caring about, is there any way I can help you?
Right. I mean, this is why you had a surprisingly high response from your surveys and then interview requests from the LinkedIn work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
A good bit higher than what was expected.
Well, I think part of it is the way that you write the messages and just say, look, I'm not going to follow this up with a horrible sales pitch, right. Because that's what almost every LinkedIn connection request is these days, is you get this connection out of the blue and then the next thing you've got somebody trying to sell you Forex or something,
Right.
so just reassuring people, hey, that's not what I'm about here. And I really do think it's enlightened self-interest. It's this thing of fiduciary responsibility and really caring. Can you help the other person?
This is an old phrase of J. Abraham. Mm-hmm. we came across many years ago. And because some people know exactly what it is, particularly if they're lawyers and accountants. But for those who aren't, what does fiduciary responsibility mean to you?
It means putting the client and their needs before your own, right. Even if it costs you money. Nicely put, yeah. And it's basically just putting other people, just caring about other people. And lots of people say it in different ways. Like, I know there's a friend of mine, Liston Witherell, and his business is called Serve, Don't Sell. Right. And that's just a great way of putting it, This is true. I mean, on our expert panel, which I know you were in the audience, you asked a few great questions. Christine Schlonsky was big about that when you get clear on the service and the value that you bring to your potential client without in any way being pushy as such, then it becomes much easier to have actual sales conversations because you have their interests at heart. And they can tell. People can tell when you're talking to them. People can tell. We are the best lie detectors. The human being is the best lie detector. We know when there's something shady or somebody's trying to push you. You just detect it. Look, I remember one of the first conversations we had back in 2006. I remember you telling me you talked a client out of a 10 grand deal and down to, I think it was 2,500 or something. Yeah. You were one of the few. He'd asked. I remember this guy. He'd asked like 4 or 8 different people, and they were all like 8 to 12 grand was the quotes for what he was asking. They just did what
the guy asked. Whereas you were the only one who said, okay, stop a second. Tell me about your business. How does it work? And I remember you're like, okay, he ordered, it was cleaning products or something. And he ordered, they always ordered
he sold industrial cleaning products to schools and factories.
He didn't need e-commerce because
not at that point. I mean, maybe I'd advise him differently now, but back at that point, his customers were not ordering online. The procurement departments in hospitals weren't putting their credit card numbers in online,
and the orders weren't changing much every
there was. Yeah, I'd probably give that particular guy maybe slightly different advice now.
I can imagine you would. But the point was the same. You actually asked questions about the real need behind it, and he was very gently educated with your knowledge that actually he didn't need e-commerce. He didn't need all these things he thought he needed that sounded buzzwordy at the time. No other web developer at the time thought to do that. No other consultant thought to do that. And that was so that was always the embodiment whenever I describe fiduciary responsibility, I literally give that example, that it's potentially talking yourself out of some money, but serving better.
I guess it's going back to trying to figure out what are they actually trying to achieve here? What's the true business goal here?
And this brings us on to another topic that you've discussed many times with me, which this eternal struggle of web design as a translation project.
Yeah, so I think a few different things about web design, and one thing that I think about it is it's trying to take the vision of the business owner or the person who's tasked with the website, take their vision and translate that into a website, while also making sure that it's meeting the business goals, which are usually dependent on the end user, not what the business actually tells you. So you have to try and translate all of that and figure all those parts out. How does that actually work together? Because quite often somebody will say, we have to have a video on the homepage, and you've got to then try and work back to that. And so I had that situation where I had somebody insisting on having a video loading on the background, and it does look really cool when you visit a website and you see that. But quite often it can cause the website to slow down, and it's usually unnecessary. And so I was really trying to push back against that. And so I had to find out, why is he so insistent on having this? And so ultimately what I found out was that this was for an organization where the CEO was actually under pressure from the board. And one of his deliverables was to get a website that looked really impressive. That was what really mattered to him, was that it needed to look really impressive. And that's why it had to have this video. And once I understood that, I stopped pushing back so hard, because I understood, okay, this is genuinely important to him. And what I said to him was, look, this isn't so good for the end user. But I didn't tell him that I knew the behind the scenes stuff. But I didn't push back on that once I understood that, because suddenly it made sense to me why it was a big deal for him. So we kind of we optimized the video so that it would load as fast as it possibly could, which is still a little bit slower personally than I would like. But I understood where he was coming from.
Yeah, because as I said, the speed load time is huge for SEO, that even fractions of a second people bounce off far more. So it is a huge factor. But it also sounds like a very interesting parallel for a lot of consultants as well, where often you're being told things by clients and they seem a bit off or daft even. And there's often a deeper, more personal reason behind them.
The guy in the TV show House, what does he say? Everybody lies.
Everybody lies.
So, they don't. Sometimes they don't tell you what's really going on. So you've got to try and interpret it and figure it out. Exactly,
and give them that space that it's not just a daft request. There might be some real reason behind it.
I mean, sometimes you just have to come back with logical arguments as to why you shouldn't do it that way, or sometimes what you can do is you can say, well, look, let's test it. Let's make version A and version B and see which people prefer, see which does better in testing, and that can work well.
Absolutely. And in that sort of gentle struggle with clients in a good way to try and get inside their head to see what they're actually asking for and where the need is coming from for certain things, certain aspects. And then, as I said, trying to then bring in the third party, which people forget in the equation, being the clients, because that's who it's ultimately for, and trying to balance all those elements. But as goes struggles, I know you've had certainly a few in your career, as everyone has. But what were some of those bigger struggles you've encountered, and how did you solve them? I'm sure there's lots
I think the biggest one probably was the lack of specialization, and that was probably the hardest thing to figure out. And then to start to turn the ship, because it takes quite a while. It's a slow process. So what I figured out was, so back about, I'd say nearly 5 years ago now, I realized, okay, I'm not an expert here, and I can never be an expert in websites because it's just too general. And so I needed to find some way to niche down, or to niche down. And so trying to figure that out. And so I started a process of starting to learn about specialization. I found a guy who's a specialist in specialization called Philip Morgan. And he's now a business coach of mine. And I read everything that he puts out. He's a very smart guy. And so through a process of reading a lot about it and talking with people like Philip, I started the process of specializing, and that was quite slow, and it was very difficult, and it was scary as well, because I went through the same fear as I know that other people do, where you are literally turning down opportunity. That's what you're doing in order to create better opportunity. But yeah, it was very scary. But I think that was probably the hardest thing for me. But I'm very glad that I did it, and I found it to be very beneficial.
Excellent. Yeah, to flip that into a counterpoint, what are some of the red flags for you when you see a client or a project that makes you think, I need to back away from this one, other than the specialization, because that's a little bit more obvious now, but even in the last 5 or 10 years, you've learned a huge amount from more difficult clients or difficult projects, or how to do them a bit better. So what are some of the little red flags that you look out for?
Well, I think that any kind of creative or consultant, freelancer, or anybody working in that world who's been around for a while will have this kind of automatic, almost instinctual kind of red flag detector, where you look for things. The wording, the way that people word things, low end clients tend to be horrible customers, and so get out of the low end of the market. Don't do services for people with very little budget. They tend to want a lot more than people who have higher budgets. For some strange reason, those who have larger budgets are much more reasonable, and their expectations are kind of more realistic. And that's a lesson that you learn, I think, pretty quickly.
I mean, I remember all that, because when I used to coach coaches, that's what one of the points I used to give them was they had to do, 50 hours pro bono. And they were getting frustrated that clients were only making a bit of progress. It's like, when the clients pay you money, their progress goes up, because it's the whole story in their head of, I'm paying money for this, therefore I'm making this happen. Whereas for pro bono, you're thinking, we're just seeing how it goes. It's much less skin in the game, as I use the phrase. So it's saying if you can get them any advancement and improvements for free, then you're going to do great when they're paying you. Yeah.
Then another thing is just any kind of micromanagement, and that's usually pretty easy to detect in the wording. And just people who don't respect your time, or just don't seem to have respect for you as a professional. And so I
remember we had conversations about that one before, where sometimes people in the same boat or similar boat, where sometimes you start in a very taken in as an expert, and then the relationship doesn't stay on that footing. I mean, that hasn't been a problem for you for a few years now, but
yeah, and I guess in part just because I spot those. I was just thinking another red flag indicator is somebody who's determined to use one particular tool to solve a problem. Quite often, again, it's going to be a micromanagement thing. If they've decided this is what I want. Now, sometimes that's not fair. Sometimes they have just made a good, they've started their analysis. But I think what and they're doing research into it, and they think, okay, this is, for example, somebody says, oh, we definitely want to do it in WordPress. And that's fair enough, and there's good logic behind that decision. But usually it's better to just revisit the original business goal and just verify, okay, does this actually meet the objectives,
Very good, very good. And on that note, we're coming to the last stretch here, but if someone wanted to learn more about your industry, your area, so potentially either marketing, but more so maybe this idea of authority marketing and vertical specialization, what might be some of the books or blogs that you could point them to get a better feel for that? I mean, other than your own, of course, which will be very much prominent in the show notes, but is there anywhere else that you'd invite them to read or watch?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I mean, I can give you a list to go in the show notes of suggested reading. But where would I start? I know that HubSpot have some good information, particularly their more recent blog posts on inbound marketing. That's a good place to kind of get a general idea for inbound marketing. If you're in the professional services space, there's guys like Jonathan Stark, Philip Morgan, Ian Brody, Drew McClellan, David C. Baker, Blair Enns. And I'll give you links for those. Great. And all of those are people who I would follow and listen and read what they put out. And personally, you can probably tell by the bookshelf behind me, personally, I love books. And I think that books are one of the single best investments you can make. Absolutely. Because it's crazy to think that for just 20 quid, you can get the value of some experts' best ideas distilled down into this very easy to read format. Usually now, I know that sometimes the books aren't so great, but a lot of the time you can get incredibly valuable ideas and concepts from books. So I strongly recommend, reading books from the top people, and listening to an audiobook if that's your preference.
Absolutely, yeah. And those, as Alastair said, those all those names and those links to their blogs and to their books will be in the show notes. I just heard, I know a lot of the guys that you're talking about, but I'm just laughing because I haven't thought of Blair Enns in a little while, and he's a remarkable negotiation practitioner. Also, how he trains, because he works, as you well know, with creatives in particular, and he has some remarkable exercises he works people through to improve their negotiation mindset more than even on a tactical level. And so I'm a huge advocate of his. So absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, your mentor Philip Morgan and Jonathan Stark as well are two. Yeah,
and by the way, most of those people are also on podcasts. And this is another great resource. So the Two Bobs podcast is Blair Enns and David C. Baker. Jonathan Stark has a great podcast with Rochelle Moulton called The Business of Authority, and that one I would really recommend for people wanting to get into kind of inbound marketing and that. So that would be that plus reading blogs like the HubSpot blog and things like that. Yep. Outstanding
stuff. All right, Alastair, we'll pause it there until we talk again. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. Cheers. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.